I'm not the star tonight. Good evening, everyone. It's really amazing to see so many family, friends, colleagues, members of the wider community, students here present for this really special occasion. We're here to celebrate the extraordinary career and legacy of one of UNC's most beloved professors, Dr. Bart D. Ehrman. After more than 40 years in the classroom, 37 of them right here at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Professor Ehrman is giving his final university lecture. And while this marks the end of an era for our campus, it is certainly not an end to Bart's scholarship, public engagement, or teaching in all the myriad forms that he continues to embrace. But tonight is a moment to look back with gratitude on what he has given to this university, to the wider public, and to look ahead with excitement to what still lies ahead in the career of one of the world's most influential scholars of early Christianity. Bart is a scholar whose work has shaped contemporary conversations about the New Testament and the origins of Christianity, a teacher who has invited generations of students to read ancient texts with rigor and courage, and a colleague whose intellectual energy and generosity have defined our community. His scholarship is admired for its rigor and range, and for the ways it brings complex historical questions into clear, vivid focus. Before we begin, however, I'd like to invite one of Bart's local colleagues to the stage to share a personal reflection on our guest of honor tonight. Please join me in welcoming Mark Goodacre, Professor of Religious Studies at Duke University.
I was going through, I was going through my blog earlier on. I ran a search on Bart Ehrman, and I came upon a lovely quotation from the LA Times in 2011. Bart Ehrman is something of a superman when it comes to scriptural studies. Bart has, I think, over the years achieved the impossible. He's raised several $1 million for charity through a blog. I remember in 2013, people talking about how blogs were a thing of the past. He's got over 200,000 subscribers on YouTube and over 700 videos. And probably his greatest achievement is making textual criticism interesting and actually understandable. There was a great advertisement in the 1970s for the beer Heineken, which always reminds me of another beloved colleague and friend of Bart's, Liz Clark. The Heineken ad always used to say that it refreshes the parts that other beers can't reach. And I think that's true of Bart's scholarship. He's able to reach the parts that other scholars can't. I mean, look at the sheer numbers of people here in appreciation of his scholarship. But Hugo mentioned that these are personal reflections. I should say for the first thing, I actually wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Bart, because he was on my search committee 20 years ago with E.P. Sanders and Richard Hayes. I mean, what a group of scholars that is. Bart models fine scholarship. He drafts chapters, shares chapters with his colleagues. He takes criticism seriously, sometimes reluctantly, but he takes it seriously. And one of my favorite things over the years has been CIA, which stands for Christianity in Antiquity. And it's basically a kind of secular Bible study that meets at Bart's house. You have beer and wine instead of tea and coffee. You share about your research going around the room instead of giving personal testimonies or prayer requests. But Bart doesn't have to agree with you to appreciate you, and he and I disagree on pretty much everything. Unlike me, Bart is a deeply conservative scholar. He accepts the existence of Q. He thinks that John is independent of the synoptics. He thinks that there's oceans of oral traditions, lost gospels, and forgotten stories. But my advice to anyone would be, don't debate with Bart. I made the mistake of sitting down on a Sunday afternoon a few weeks ago in what Chris and Megan described was going to be a fireside chat. I mean, this was a proper, no-holds-barred argument. I mean, Bart can be very stubborn, and he actually said afterwards, it's this instinct. It's like a frog and sees the fly, and the tongue just comes out. And I did check in with Dr. Sarah Beckwith that it was okay to mention this, but she said, "Imagine what it's like living with you." I would like to say how much I have appreciated having Bart as a colleague. Thank you. I want to appreciate you. I want to laud you. You are a great scholar and an even better human being. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And now we've come to the moment we've all been waiting for. Tonight, I have the privilege of introducing a scholar whose work has transformed how millions of people think about one of the world's most influential books. Bart Ehrman is one of the most visible and respected New Testament scholars of our time, a person who helped shape the study of early Christianity through rigorous scholarship, fearless questions, and a gift for clarity. After earning his MDiv and PhD at Princeton Theological Seminary, Bart taught at Rutgers before arriving in Chapel Hill in 1988. He has served as chair of UNC's Department of Religious Studies, and he currently holds the title of James A. Gray Distinguished Professor of Biblical Studies. But titles alone, as we all know, don't quite capture the legacy of Bart. That legacy is also written in part in a remarkable body of scholarship. Through his work on textual criticism, the historical Jesus, the astonishing diversity of early Christian movements, orthodoxy and heresy, the formation of the New Testament, and ancient pseudepigraphy and forgery, Bart set the agenda for decades of subsequent students and scholars. His name is associated with landmark titles in our field, including the orthodox corruption of Scripture, the text of the New Testament, its transmission, corruption, and restoration, and forgery and counter-forgery, among so many others. He has produced important editions of early Christian texts, including a volume on the Apostolic Fathers for the Loeb Classical Library. And he has shaped scholarship beyond his own writing through major editorial roles, including service as co-editor-in-chief of the journal Vigiliae Christianae and as editor of 2 monograph series. But what makes Bart's career truly exceptional is its reach. Many academics may influence a field, some may shape a field, far fewer will transform the public conversation around it. And yet this is exactly what Bart has done. In dozens of books, including 6 New York Times bestsellers, he has brought serious, cutting-edge scholarship to a wide audience with rare clarity and verve. Titles like Misquoting Jesus, God's Problem, How Jesus Became God, and The Triumph of Christianity have been translated into dozens of languages and have sold over 2 million copies. Bart has also been a familiar presence in major media outlets, appearing on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, The Colbert Report, CNN, The Discovery Channel, The History Channel, National Geographic, BBC, NPR's Fresh Air, Talk of the Nation, and in publications ranging from The New Yorker to Time, Newsweek, The New York Times, and The Washington Post. And through his blog, podcasts, public lectures, debates, and streaming content, Bart continues to educate and challenge new audiences. And yet, Bart is a teacher at heart, a scholar who loves the classroom best of all. And generations of students have learned from him, not only in the classroom, but also through his textbooks, especially the New Testament, A Historical Introduction to the Early Christian Writings, which is the #1 best-selling textbook in our field, now in its 8th edition. This very year, Religious Studies Review named it one of the 10 most important works published in New Testament studies over the past half-century. Bart's excellence in teaching has also been recognized time and again here at UNC. He won Undergraduate Student Teaching Award in 1993, the Bowman and Gordon Gray Award for Excellence in Teaching, and the Pope's Spirit of Inquiry Teaching Award in 2008. And his mentorship has launched a formidable list of PhD students who now serve as leading scholars and teachers across the country at such institutions as Cornell, Virginia Tech, Michigan State, BYU, the University of Richmond, NC State, and many others. There are many more accolades I could add to these. I could praise Bart's immense contributions to charity, including more than $1 million raised for organizations including Urban Ministries of Durham, the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina, CARE, and Doctors Without Borders. I could highlight his contributions as a department chair, colleague, and one of the most effective ambassadors and fundraisers UNC has known. But I want to end on a personal note. I've been lucky to have a different kind of perspective on Bart, to know him as a junior colleague. The person I met 10 years ago, the person I have come to know, is simply the most devoted mentor I could have ever asked for. I can't imagine a better one, and I know so many students of Bart's feel the same way. He has championed and supported my career at every turn. He invited me to co-author with him, proactively reached out to me, a junior colleague, regularly, monthly, for dinners and conversations. He was always ready to pick up the phone when I needed advice. He is everything that I aspire to be as a mentor, and it has been such a privilege to learn from him, to be challenged by him, and to argue with him. Oh my God, so many arguments with him. But really, there are no words for how spectacularly lucky I have been to be Bart's junior colleague for the past decade. I'm sure we could all share similar stories of how Bart has touched, transformed, and challenged each of us. But now, it's time to let Bart speak. Please join me in welcoming the one and only Bart Ehrman as he presents his final UNC lecture entitled The Most Significant Discovery in the History of Biblical Studies. Welcome, Bart.
Well, thank you. Is this okay? Is the mic on? Can you hear me okay? Good. Yeah, well, thank you, Mark, I think. And thank you, Hugo. I was going to say I'm speechless, but that's probably not a good thing, right? Got to give a speech. So I've been very lucky to have such brilliant colleagues over the years. Both at Duke, back in the days when Ed Sanders and Dale Martin were there, and today when Mark Goodacre and Jennifer Knust are there. These are brilliant scholars of the New Testament, all of them. And at Chapel Hill, my department that Hugo's in, we have an amazing department with amazing colleagues. And it makes all the difference for a scholar being around really smart people with really good ideas with whom you can debate. So that's all good. And so thank you. Thank you very much. I had good colleagues when I was at Rutgers as well. I was at Rutgers for 4 years. And teaching at Rutgers was a little different from teaching at Chapel Hill. Rutgers was in New Jersey. and it still is. And so the most of my students at Rutgers were not evangelical Christians. I had some evangelicals, but I had a number of Jewish students, and I had a lot of Roman Catholic students. And that was interesting because the things that my students at Rutgers got upset about are not things that my students at Chapel Hill get upset about. At Rutgers, every semester I would get comments on my teaching evaluations complaining that Ehrman thinks that Jesus had brothers. Because in the Roman Catholic tradition, Mary's a perpetual virgin, so she didn't have other children. And that was the one thing they're upset about. Contradictions in the Bible, implausible things that didn't happen, like that didn't faze them a bit. They're Catholic, they hadn't read the Bible. But man, Mary having children, no man, that can't be right. But it's very different when I moved to the South. And it only took me about 2 weeks to realize how different it was. Moved here, 1988. 2 weeks after I moved here, I got a phone call from somebody, from a reporter at the Raleigh News and Observer, who wanted to ask me a question. This is August 1988, and he wanted to know, is it true that Jesus is coming back next month? So there was a book that was in wide circulation, 2 million copies of this book in circulation called 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Occur in 1988. And it was widely read, especially in the South. And this fellow, he was a rocket engineer for NASA, so he was a smart guy. He was a fundamentalist Christian, and he had 88 biblical and common sense arguments that Jesus is coming back during Rosh Hashanah 1988, and people took him seriously. I had a student in my class that semester whose parents literally sold the farm. It's one reason why religious education is so important, because many people who subscribe to particular religious views are not well educated in them. And so we provide that here. And, when you teach religious studies in the South, it's a terrific topic for the humanities and for the universities. One of the major goals of the university is to get people to think. Teaching religious studies is perfect because most of the students come in with set ideas already about what you're going to be studying. They have ideas about the Bible. They have views of them. And when they get challenged in class, they're just confronted with something they've got to think about. And so it's not like, my brilliant wife, Sarah, she does teach at Duke. Many of you know that 25 years ago when we got married, the deal was that I agreed to live near Duke campus if she would root for the Tar Heels. Which she does, and she teaches. She started out as a medievalist, taught Chaucer, and is now one of the leading Shakespeare scholars in the world. She's a Shakespearean. But when her undergraduates take her class, and they're taking a class on Chaucer, these students do not have some kind of fixed idea about the Miller's Tale. Right? That you can't disabuse them of, maybe Hamlet, but maybe not, And so, like, if you're teaching, they don't have any commitment to it. But somebody's taking New Testament in the South, who grew up in schools in the South and in churches in the South and families in the South, and you come in, they realize that there are problems with the New Testament. They've got to deal with it. And so the point is never to convert somebody or to deconvert somebody or to make them change their mind or make them drop their religion or make them believe what you believe. It's not that at all. It's to get them to think. And if they've got some reason for what they think, that's great. Okay. But if you don't have any reason for what you think, that's a problem. I often get asked how many times I get phone calls from parents. How many times, do parents are kind of upset that you're leading their children astray, and, how big of a problem is it? And the answer is, I have never gotten a phone call in 37 years, except once. And the once was not somebody complaining about what I was teaching. So, about 30 years ago, teaching a big class, 360 students in this class, New Testament, and is back in the day, some of you who are like my age, remember that you finish a class, like you take a class, and the teacher would post the grades outside the door. Remember that? And they blacken out the name, but the people could see what the grade was. So that was that kind of situation. And so I had these sheets of thing outside my door, and with the grades. And I had 6 teaching assistants for this class, and who had small group discussions once a week, and they would do the grading for the students. And then so they did all the grading because it was a big class. And so I get a phone call 2 days after I posted the grades. Pick up the phone. Person says, Dr. Ehrman, my daughter took your New Testament class this semester, and she failed the class. I would like you to change her grade. I'm sorry, I can't change a grade, because you'd like me to. I'm really sorry, though, that your daughter failed the class. And she started talking to me, and it turns out this woman she ran a vegetable and fruit stand in western North Carolina. That's what she did for a living. And she had saved up money her entire life for her daughter to go to college. And if she failed my class, she'd be dropped out of college. Wow. So I said, well, I'm sorry. I can't change a grade. Doctor, I'm just praying to Jesus. You will see it in your heart to change your grade. So what? I asked her. So what? Okay, I'm not sure I know your daughter. What's your daughter's name? Gives me the name. I don't know every student in the class. I look it up in the files. I keep the files, and the teaching assistants, they've graded the midterms, and they graded the final, and they've got participation grades, and they got papers during the week, and so they've got all these grades lined up, and then they calculate, what the final grade is, that kind of thing. And it was, 30 years ago. We didn't have Excel spreadsheets or doing, people were doing it by hand. So I looked up the student's record, and I said, I'm sorry, she got a 56 for the class for a final grade, and the passing grade's a 60. Dr. Ehrman, I'm just hoping Jesus will allow you to add 4 points to this grade. I'm sorry, I just can't. I'm sorry, it's not fair to the system, it's not fair to the other students, I can't. So oh God. And so, but then I thought, well, at least I ought to kind of recrunch the numbers and just see. And so the TA that I had that semester, who was this person's TA, was one of the really bright students I've had over the years, who ended up having a very good professional teaching career in a major university. A really bright guy. The thing was, though, he wasn't very good at math. So I recrunched the grades. He was off by 4 points. Absolutely true. I called her up. I don't know what kind of prayer life you got. Wow. So that was the only phone call that I ever got from a student. Well, okay. So in classes like that, we are dealing with approaching the New Testament from a historical and a literary point of view, rather than from a faith perspective. And we have a range of people from a range of faith traditions, and some people are very committed to their faith, some have left their faith, some are atheists, some are very conservative evangelicals, some are Jews, some are whatever. I mean, Muslims, it's a wide range, but we're approaching these things from historical and literary points of view. And a lot of things we talk about are things they've never heard before in their churches, even if they're going to a fairly mainline church that has a pastor who went to a really good seminary, who's heard all this stuff himself, but doesn't, or herself, and doesn't teach it. So with that, all that said, I want to get into of all the things that are involved with teaching teaching biblical studies. What do I consider to be the most significant discovery ever made in its history, in the history of the discipline? That's what I want to talk about. So, our flawed manuscripts. here's our situation when it comes. I'm going to be talking right now about the New Testament. I'm going to stick most of this to the New Testament because it's my main field of expertise. Whoever wrote the books of the New Testament, the various books, wrote them at some time, mainly in the first century. And you just take an example, like whoever wrote the Gospel of Matthew sat down at one point and wrote it out, maybe around the year 80 or 85. He wrote his Gospel. He had other sources, but he wrote something down on papyrus, and that was sometime in the first century. And you can call that the original thing, the thing he wrote, and that he started passing around for people to look at. And then after a while, somebody wanted a copy of it, right? And so somebody made a copy of it, and then somebody copied the copy. And then somebody copied the copy of the copy. And then somebody copied the copy of the copy of the copy. And it went on like that. It went on like that for centuries. And that thing that the person wrote doesn't exist anymore. And neither do the first copies. Or the copies of the copies. We don't have a full copy of Matthew until about 300 years after it was written. Okay? So that's just the way it is. And that's not like unique for the New Testament. That's like all the books of the ancient world are like that. It's just how it was. And so you don't have originals, you've got later copies. The problem is that scribes make mistakes. And sometimes they're sleepy or inattentive or they're bored or whatever, and they leave out a word. Or they'll copy the same word twice. Or they'll leave out a sentence. Or they'll copy the same sentence twice. Sometimes they'll copy the whole page twice. I mean, it's just like you're tired, right? You're in this modest, it's like, And so they make mistakes. And sometimes, apparently, it looks like they change things because they thought they weren't worded correctly. Yeah? There was something wrong here, and they changed it to correct it. And the problem is, it's hard to know, like if you've got two forms of the text, right? You've got a verse that's worded in two different ways. Suppose you're a scribe and you're copying this, you think, well, that's wrong, I need to correct it. And then you correct it, but you correct it in a way that's incorrect, right? You're not correcting it to the original, you're correcting it to something else. Now you got three forms of the text, right? Oh my God. And so it goes on like that for centuries, so it's a problem. The first time this is really recognized as a major problem was in the year 1707. An English scholar named John Mill, not related to John Stuart Mill, the Victorian. John Mill was a biblical scholar. In 1707, he published an edition of the Greek New Testament where he gave the wording of the New Testament. At the bottom of the page, he listed the differences that he had found among his manuscripts. Those are called textual variants. A variant is a variant way of reading a passage. And so he had access to what about 100 manuscripts of the New Testament had for their texts, and he compared these 100 manuscripts. And to the shock and dismay of many of his readers, he uncovered 30,000 places of variation. And he told them he hadn't included all that he found, just the important ones. Whoa, okay, that elicited a response. A number of people claimed that he was trying to make the text of the New Testament uncertain and that it was a satanic ploy. His supporters pointed out he didn't invent these places of variation. He just noticed they exist. Well, okay, so today we have more than 100 manuscripts. Today we know of over 5,800 manuscripts. How many variants do we know about? We know how many do we know about? We don't know how many we know about. My teacher at Princeton Theological Seminary, Bruce Metzger, used to say, we have more variants in our manuscripts than we have words in the New Testament. And the recent estimates are around 500,000 differences. Having said that, most of these differences simply show that ancient scribes could spell no better than students can today. You misspell a word, it's a difference. So most of them don't matter, but some of them matter a lot. Some of them actually change what a verse means, or what a chapter means, or what a book means. Sometimes they change the theology of the whole thing. It's, that really does matter. But that's not the most significant discovery in the history of biblical scholarship. The findings of archaeology. Both Old Testament and New Testament are texts that people read and study and analyze, but at some point people realize, there probably should be some evidence that these things happened, like material evidence, like archaeological evidence. Well, like what? Well, in the ancient history of Israel, we have the account in the Old Testament, the book of Exodus, of the children of Israel becoming enslaved by the Egyptians for centuries and growing to be a great people. And then God raises up Moses to bring them out of their slavery in Egypt. And God works miracles through Moses. And so they escape from Egypt. They go through the Sea of Reeds, or called the Red Sea. And they escape, and the entire Egyptian army is destroyed in the map. And they escape. And we're told that there were 600,000 of these Israelites who were military-age men. So it's not counting women, not counting children, not counting the elderly. So we're talking 2.5 or 3 million people. Okay, well, that's a big event. And after that, 40 years later, they're instructed by God to go in and take over the Promised Land. And so the land of Canaan, they're to go in, and they are to destroy all the cities there and all the people there. And we're told that they did. It happens in the book of Joshua, beginning with the Battle of Jericho, where the walls come tumbling down, and the children of Israel are commanded to go into the city, and with the walls falling down, and they go in and they slaughter every man, woman, and child in the city. But it was a big walled city, massive population. So, okay, that's a big event. So with big events like this, you kind of think there might be some archaeological evidence that they happened. And then after that, you start getting kingdoms, right? You get the King David, who, young in life, slayed Goliath. He was the second king of Israel. His son Solomon built the temple. Okay, so you've got stuff that happened in the past, and archaeologists dig up what happened in the past. There had been some interest in material culture for a while. In the first half of the 20th century, there started being a broader interest by people who were particularly interested in the Bible in finding remains of things that are described in the Bible, just to verify what was in the Bible. And so they called themselves biblical archaeologists. So, archaeologists is anybody who digs anywhere for, ancient stuff. Biblical archaeologists, people like William F. Albright, who was a brilliant person, and had as one of his missions in life to find verification of the biblical accounts by digging in Israel. Early on, it looked like they were finding stuff that verified things like the destruction of the cities of Canaan by the Israelites in the 13th century BCE. 13th century BCE. But over time, archaeologists developed more rigorous methods of engaging in their work. And they dug more carefully and more systematically and started looking more critically, not to verify the biblical accounts, not to invalidate them either way. They just wanted to see what happened based on the archaeological evidence, and it wasn't good for those who were interested in verifying the Bible, because, as it turns out, there is not a single piece of archaeological evidence that there was an Exodus. Period. You ain't going to find any chariots at the bottom of the Red Sea. They ain't there. There 2.5 to 3 million people wandering around in the wilderness. There's not a single potsherd that's been found. And people have looked. And the destruction of Jericho and the other cities, it turns out Jericho may not have even been inhabited at the time. If it was inhabited, it was a small settlement and there were no walls. What's going on here? Well, what's going on here is, what's going on here? Right, what's going on here? What's going on here is that these accounts are not historical as described in the Bible. They're probably not historical as described in the Bible. But, as you just saw, this too is not the most significant discovery of biblical studies. All right, so what is? The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have, for long, had very limited knowledge about Judaism in the days of Jesus. We have very limited, it's strange how little evidence we've had, because most of our Jewish evidence about the ancient world comes from Jewish writings that were produced hundreds of years later. The Mishnah, the Talmud, and People had some ideas. We have some, of course. We have Jewish sources from the time of Jesus, especially the Jewish historian Josephus and other things. But we had fairly limited knowledge. But then a hugely significant discovery was made in 1947. In 1947, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. They were discovered by accident. But when they were discovered, it was quite significant. They were discovered in a community, near a community that's now called Qumran, spelled with a Q, Qumran, which is, it's to the sort of northwest area of northwest of the Dead Sea. So they're called the Dead Sea Scrolls. The first discovery was of a cave that had a jar that had scrolls in it. And once they found this jar of scrolls, and they wondered if these other caves, lots of caves around, hundreds of caves around there. They started exploring caves. They ended up finding 11 caves that had scrolls in them. Some of them were fairly complete scrolls. I mean, the Isaiah scroll is magnificent. It's a copy of Isaiah that is 1,000 years earlier than the copy we were relying on up till then. 1,000 years earlier. So people were copying Jewish manuscripts, so we did Christian manuscripts, but we didn't have the intervening manuscripts, right? We had this thing from the year 1000, and now all of a sudden, whoa, we got this thing from Isaiah. So they found some amazing scrolls in 11 of the caves. There are 11 caves that had scrolls in them, and they vastly improved our understanding of first century Judaism because of the kinds of things they were. They were biblical manuscripts, which had, so for every book of the Hebrew Bible was discovered, at least a fragment of the book, or the whole thing, was discovered, except for the book of Esther, as it turns out. And other writings too, though. There were commentaries on these books that showed you what this Jewish community, it turns out it was a Jewish community that were gathering manuscripts, producing manuscripts. And we could find out how they were interpreting the Bible, what their methods of interpretation were, which we didn't have good access to before. We have books of Psalms. They wrote Psalms and recorded Psalms. They have books that would describe how their community was being organized and how they behaved together in their community, rules for the community to describe how this Jewish community was functioning at the time. We have a description of a war that was soon going to take place. It was going to be the war to end all wars. The apocalyptic end of time was going to come, and we have a scroll that describes it. These scrolls are just absolutely fantastic for enlightening us about one aspect of Judaism that we had very little knowledge of before. And so hugely important, but also for the relevance for understanding Jesus. Because these scrolls embody a worldview about the coming judgment of God against this world that's going to happen very soon to destroy all those who are opposed to God and bring in a good world that God had planned from the beginning. It's very much like the teachings of Jesus. At the same time, in roughly the same area. It's not that Jesus belonged to this community, but it set the context within which to put Jesus' proclamation. Hugely significant. But not the most significant discovery. All right. That's the prologue. The single most discovery I'm now going to tell you, but I'm going to tell you first, it's going to seem rather banal. Minor, uninteresting, not exactly headline news, but it revolutionized the field. And it forever changed our understanding of the Jewish and Christian scriptures. It is that the Bible's not a single book. The most important discovery, I'm going to argue, is this. Let me explain why this rather banal observation has made such a huge impact. The reality of the canon. Canon of Scripture refers to the books that are all together in Scripture. You have a canon of Shakespeare. You got a canon of the Hebrew Bible, canon of New Testament, canon of Scripture, all the books in there. We have 66 books in the Christian Bible, 39 in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, 27 in the New Testament. So 66 books written, by different authors, to different audiences, at different times, telling different narratives, with different teachings, holding different views, presupposing different perspectives. They're often at odds with each other. They often have implausible statements in them and histories in them. And themselves are often made up of different sources, written by different authors to different audiences at different times, that have been combined together into one book. You've got 66 of these books, but people treat them as a book because they're between two covers. That's a problem. It looks like one book. And when you read a book, you expect it to be consistent. It doesn't occur to you that the author's going to flat out contradict himself in the next page. You don't expect it, and if you don't expect it, you don't look for it. If you don't look for it, you don't see it. Once you realize it's 66 books, oh boy, does that open up things in a huge way. And I want to illustrate that. I want to illustrate it. I'm going to start in the beginning. Genesis chapters 1 and 2. So, this last week, I was talking to one of my students in one of my classes who was an evangelical, self-professed evangelical church-going guy who was also a neuroscience major. And he wanted to know how he can take Genesis 1 literally. How is it possible? Because he's unwilling to give up the idea that it's literally true because he's an evangelical Christian, but he's also a scientist. And it doesn't seem right. So is it a metaphor? But if you say it's a metaphor, where do if you say one thing's a metaphor, not really literally true, where do you draw the line? Like, that's just the first book. It's the first chapter of the first book. What about the second chapter? What about, the ninth chapter? What about the next book? I mean, where do you draw the line? He was worried about it. And it's a very good question. Can you take it as literally true, Genesis chapter 1? What I do with my students, by the way, is when I'm teaching Hebrew Bible, which luckily my Hebrew Bible colleagues who are here will attest it's a good thing I'm not doing that, but it's not my main field. But when I do teach Hebrew Bible, I simply have my students do a very basic exercise that I recommend you all do. Just read Genesis 1 and list everything that happens in order, then read Genesis 2, which is also part of the creation account, and list everything that happens in order. Just do it. Compare your lists. Okay. Yeah, good luck. So the basic sequence in Genesis 1 is fine. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And then you have a sequence of days. There was evening, there was morning, the first day. Then you have the second day, and God puts this firmament in the sky, and down below, and then the third day, and he separates the water so dry land appears, and the plants appear. The fourth day, and you go through these days one after the one, and actually the basic sequence ain't bad. You got light. Okay, think Big Bang. You get land before you get plants. You get plants before you get animals. You get animals before you get humans. Pretty good, right? Not bad. But 6 days? People say, it wasn't really days. If it wasn't really days, why does he say evening and morning the first day? Right? He's not talking about geological periods here. It's evening and morning the first day, but there are problems with that too. Because you have evenings and mornings before the sun's created. The sun's not created till the fourth day. How's that supposed to work that you have evening and morning before the first day? Before the fourth. And you have the plants created on the third day before the sun's created. What happened to photosynthesis here? And this guy's a scientist. He's saying, I'm not, oh my God. And you have light created the first day before you have a sun, moon, and stars. What? Okay, so, moreover, you got Genesis 2. This is where Adam and Eve are created. Humans are created in Genesis 1, male and female. He, created them in Genesis 1 on the sixth day before he rested on the seventh. But what about Genesis 2? Well, it also has a sequence of creation. You can see for yourself. in which the humans are not created the last thing, they're created the first thing. The first thing God creates is Adam, before there were any plants. Wait a second. The plants and animals in Genesis 2 are created after Adam. So first of all, that doesn't work in Genesis 1. Second of all, it can't be right. But you only know that, or you're only willing to see that, or only willing to admit that, if you realize that the author of Genesis has somehow taken two different stories from two different authors, written at two different times, for two different reasons, and plucked them together. You put them together, then you get Genesis 1 and 2, and you got problems. You got problems with both of them individually, and now you got problems with the sequence. So the problem is people want to harmonize them and make them say the same thing. But if you make them say the same thing, then they're not saying what they actually say. They're saying something else. So that's not good, because it means that what Genesis 1 describes is now compromised with what Genesis 2 describes, so it isn't describing what it actually describes. If humans are created last, and you say they're also created first, how does that work exactly? So they're either, well, yeah, you either compromise them or they're just both wrong if you harmonize them. All right, well, why does it matter? If you're interested in understanding the Bible, it's important because it shows that there are things, this one example begins to show that there are problems with understanding the Bible as descriptions of things that actually happened in the past. Some of the Bible did happen. The world did come into existence. Plants did occur on the planet, and there are animals that appeared, and humans did appear. So there are things that happened, yes, but not necessarily as described in Genesis 1 and 2. In part, you can see that there are things that happen that are not actually as described simply by noting the contradictions. The point of the contradictions is not so you can go home and tell your parents that I now know the Bible's full of contradictions, so I'm not going to go to church anymore. You know, it's not, the point is not the contradiction. The point is, if you see the contradiction, it makes you understand what this thing is that you're reading, that otherwise you think is one book. It shows that these are stories that are being told. The accounts of Genesis 1 and 2 are literary. They're not scientific treatises. They're not necessarily historical in the sense of things that really happened. They're stories that are trying to convey meaning. If you modernize them so they fit with modern science, or you harmonize them so that they fit together, you're robbing each of these stories of their own literary integrity, which means you're misinterpreting it. And if you think the Bible is valuable, then you probably should not want to misinterpret it, in my humble opinion. Implausibilities and contradictions actually help interpretation. They open up interpretation because you start seeing things you wouldn't see before, but you're not making stuff up now, you're seeing it in the text because you recognize what's going on in these texts. So I'm going to give a bunch of examples, quick kind of hop, skip, and a jump through some examples with the New Testament. And I'm going to give one from the life of Paul, just because I rather like this one. The rest are going to be from the Gospels. Paul is a very important figure in the New Testament. 13 books of the New Testament claim to be written by Paul. He probably didn't write all 13 of those, but scholars are pretty sure he wrote 7 of them. And in some of these 7 books, he says things about his life, things that had happened to him before. We also have a book of Acts in the New Testament, which is an account of what happened to Christianity after Jesus' resurrection for the next 30 years. And Paul is the main character of Acts. He's the main character of the final 2/3. And so Acts tells a lot about the things that Paul said and did during his missionary work, during his years. Paul is the hero of Acts, and he's regularly misrepresented in Acts. If you compare what Acts says about Paul with what Paul says about Paul about the same thing, like they talk about the same thing, and Acts will describe something, and Paul will describe it years before Acts is written, and you'll see they're at odds with each other. So what do you do with that? Well, I'm just going to give one example of this. It's a very basic example. Paul converts to Christianity according to both Paul and the book of Acts. The book of Acts is interesting because Paul converts to Christianity in Acts chapter 9, but there are two other accounts of Paul's conversion, one in chapter 22 and one in chapter 26. 26? 24? 26, thank you. New Testament scholar on the second row. When you compare those three accounts, chapter 9, chapter 22, chapter 26, just compare them sometime in their details. He contradicts himself. I'm not going to show that. I'm interested in how Paul describes his conversion. And really more what happens right after his conversion. This is what I'm interested in, this single point. What happens to Paul right after he has a vision of Jesus and he comes to believe in Jesus and he becomes to believe in the gospel? What happens right after that? What happens? According to the book of Acts, Paul is blinded in chapter 9. He's blinded by the light. He's told to go into Damascus, where he will meet somebody who is going to instruct him in the faith. And he goes in and he gets instructed in the faith. And immediately after that, he goes straight down to Jerusalem to meet with the apostles, with James and Peter, the other apostles who are in Jerusalem. Okay, fair enough. So he finds out about the faith right after he has the vision, then he goes to Jerusalem and meets with the apostles in Jerusalem. That's Acts' account. What's Paul's account? Paul actually tells us what happens in Galatians chapter 1. Paul doesn't give too many autobiographical things in his letters, but he does say something in Galatians 1 about what happened after he came to believe in Jesus. And what he explicitly says is, you can look this up, he says, I did not consult with flesh and blood. I did not talk to anybody about it. And I did not go confer with the apostles in Jerusalem. And then he says, I swear by God, this is the truth. By God, this is the truth. The reason he swears it's the truth is because people are saying Paul got his gospel from other people. Paul got his gospel, other people told him, and he got this message from the other apostles. And since he disagrees with Paul and James, he's just making all this up. And Paul's trying to say, no, I didn't even talk to them. It was 3 years before I went to talk to them, he says. In Acts, what happens? He makes a beeline to Jerusalem to talk to them. You know, it's not the same. And in fact, it's contradictory. Can you reconcile them? Look, you can reconcile anything. Work hard enough at it, I'm just telling you, you can do it. I was a fundamentalist. Let me tell you, you can do it. You just got to work hard at it. But if you do reconcile them, you miss the point of each. Acts is trying to say that the apostles and Paul were all on the same page. They conferred with one another. Paul's trying to insist this message comes straight from God. Christ told me, no one else. If you reconcile them, neither point is right. Okay, well, that's Paul. Let's talk about Jesus. Birth of Jesus, that's coming up. Don't want to burst any bubbles here. Right before Christmas. But I suggest you do another comparative study, which I do with my students, and a lot of New Testament scholars do this in their undergraduate classrooms. Read Matthew chapters 1 and 2 and Luke chapters 1 and 2. These are the only two passages in the entire Bible that talk about the birth of Jesus to a virgin named Mary in Bethlehem. And so these are the two passages. You don't have an account of the birth of Jesus in Mark or in John. You don't have it anywhere else in the New Testament, just these two passages. I have my students read Matthew 1 and 2, list everything that happens carefully, then list everything that happens in Luke 1 and 2 carefully, then compare your list. And I say, look for things that are similar, look for things that are different, and see if there are any differences that cannot be reconciled. So, you can have differences that are not contradictions. Matthew has the wise men coming to worship Jesus after he's born. Luke has the shepherds coming to worship Jesus after he's born. Doesn't have the wise men. Matthew doesn't have the shepherds. It's not a contradiction. Why would that be a contradiction? It's just they're telling different stories, right? Matthew, after Jesus is born, King Herod wants to kill this born king of the Jews because King Herod is the king of the Jews. And so he sends out the troops to kill all the boys 2 years and under in Bethlehem. But this is Matthew. Joseph hears about it and takes Jesus and his mother and goes down to Egypt to escape. And after they hear that King Herod died, however long that was, they return and resettle in Nazareth. Okay? So they go down to Egypt. You have the flight to Egypt in Matthew. You don't have anything like that in Luke. In Luke, you've got something you don't have in Matthew. The reason they're in Bethlehem in Luke is because there's a census. Caesar Augustus has issued a census for the entire world to be registered for, and Joseph is from the lineage of King David, and so he has to register in Bethlehem because that's where his ancestors from. So they live in Nazareth, but they're going down to Bethlehem to register for the census, and while they're there, Mary goes into labor, and she gives birth to a child. Okay, so Luke has that census, doesn't have the thing to Egypt. Matthew has the thing to Egypt. So those are differences, and there are similarities. They both have Mary and Joseph and Bethlehem and virgin and all that. So compare them. They have basic agreements, as I just said, but they do have some odd discrepancies. I'll just mention two. What is their hometown? When Mary and Joseph, when Jesus is born in Matthew, the wise men come sometime later, maybe as much as 2 years later, and they find him in his house in Bethlehem. Moreover, when Mary and Joseph go down to Egypt and they come back, it says that they can't come back to Judea because now Herod's son is ruling, Archelaus, and he's worse than his father, so they have to relocate to Nazareth. Their intention was to go back to Bethlehem. In Matthew, the hometown is Bethlehem. In Luke, it's explicit, it's Nazareth. Which is it? Moreover, if it's true that they went down to Egypt, however long that takes on foot, if it's true they stayed there till Herod died, and then didn't come back till they found out that Herod died, and then they come back. How long are we talking about? Months? Years? I don't know. But in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is born. 8 days later, he's circumcised. 32 days later, Mary performs the sacrifice as required in the book of Leviticus. And immediately, 40 days later, they return to Nazareth. How do they return to Nazareth after 40 days if they're going down to Egypt? How's that work? It doesn't work. These are stories. They're not histories. Just as one example, Matthew wants Jesus to go down to Egypt. Why? Because in Matthew's gospel emphasizes that everything that happens to Jesus in his birth is predicted by Scripture. Hosea chapter 11, verse 1, out of Egypt have I called my son. Book of Hosea. Well, Hosea is talking about the Exodus. The children of Israel came out of Egypt. But Matthew's applying it to the Messiah of Israel. So he's got to get to Egypt so he can come out of Egypt to fulfill the prophecy. That's only Matthew, not Luke. Different stories. What about the death of Jesus? Let's go to the other end of things. Here's an example I use a lot with my students and with everybody else who will listen to me. On what day did Jesus die? Seems like a kind of a basic question, and who cares which day he died, right? The matter is he died for my sins. Okay, fine, great. No, but what about the Gospels? What do they say about this? What day did he die? All the Gospels agree that he died sometime during the Passover feast, the annual festival still celebrated today that commemorates the Exodus from Egypt. With a special meal, the Passover meal, that in the time of Jesus, while the temple was still standing, would be celebrated in Jerusalem. And one of the highlights of the meal you'd have a lamb that has been sacrificed in the temple. Whoever's cooking the meal on the day of the preparation for the Passover meal, the day before the Passover meal, they get the lamb, it's slaughtered, it's butchered, they cook it. That night they have the meal. Okay, so all the accounts have Jesus dying on a Friday, and all the accounts have it in some connection with the Passover feast where this lamb's going to be eaten. Okay, good, fine. Mark chapter 14 and 15 give us the explicit time when it happened. Mark chapter 14, the disciples asked Jesus, "Where do you want us to prepare the Passover?" So they're going to go and they're going to get the lamb and they're going to cut it up or whatever. They're going to get the unleavened bread. They're going to get the herbs. They're going to get the wine, and they're going to have a meal. And Jesus tells them where to prepare it for us. And they prepare the meal. They eat the meal. At the meal, Jesus takes the bread and he says, "This is my body." Takes the cup. "This is the new covenant in my blood." He institutes the Lord's Supper. And then afterwards, after they ate the meal, they go out. He gets arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. He spends the night in jail. And he is executed 9 o'clock Friday morning. Okay? So in Mark, it's quite clear they eat a Passover meal and Jesus is crucified the next morning. Okay? Fair enough. The Gospel of John is our last gospel. It also gives us an explicit dating of when it happened, when Jesus got crucified. In John chapter 18, chapter 19, Jesus again has a last meal. He's arrested afterwards, spends the night in jail, and he's condemned to death. And we're told when it is. John chapter 19:14 says explicitly, it's the day before the Passover meal was eaten. The day of preparation for the Passover. Wait a second. It can't be both. I mean, he didn't get crucified twice. It's either the day before or the day after the Passover. Well, which gospel are you reading? What happens if you reconcile the two? I've heard 489 ways of trying to reconcile these two. And none of them works. I'm just telling you, none of them works. But if you do try to reconcile the two, you miss the point of both of them. You especially miss John's point. John is writing later, probably 20 years after Mark. John is the only gospel that indicates that Jesus is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Jesus is understood to be the Lamb of God. And in John's gospel, which identifies Jesus as the Lamb of God, Jesus is crucified on the same day and at the same hour as the Passover lambs are being sacrificed. He is the Passover lamb. And at the hands of the same people, the chief priests, who are responsible for urging his death in the Gospel of John. So that's John's point. And if you say, no, actually it was the next day, you miss his point. So, again, this is a story it's about a historical event. Jesus was certainly crucified, but John's changed a historical fact in order to make a theological point. If you don't read it as a story, you're going to miss it. The point is not just that, they contradict each other, so there are lots of contradictions. The point is, if you see the differences, then you can ask what the meanings are. Okay, the resurrection of Jesus. Another big one. The basic gist is the same among the four stories. You get Jesus killed on a Friday. He's dead in the afternoon. There has to be a hurried burial because it's going to get dark, and the Sabbath begins when it gets dark. And so they have to bury him quickly. They bury him quickly. And then on the third day, Sunday morning, women go to the tomb. They find it empty, and they learn that he's been raised from the dead. Basic gist, the same among the four, but the details. Which women and how many women go to the tomb? Is it Mary Magdalene by herself and John, or with other women? And with other women, how many other women? And what are their names? It depends which gospel you read. Was the stone already rolled away when they got there or not? It depends which gospel you read. Whom did they see there? Did they see a young man there? Did they see two men there? Did they see an angel there? Depends which gospel you read. What were they told there? Were the women told to go tell Peter and the disciples that Jesus will meet them in Galilee? So they're supposed to go to Galilee. Are they told that? Or are they told, go tell the disciples what Jesus told them when he was in Galilee? Slight difference. Would it matter? I'm going to show why it does. Did they do what they were told? Which gospel are you reading? In Mark's gospel, it famously ends with the women hearing this message that they're to go tell Peter and the disciples that Jesus will meet them in Galilee. And then you get the final verse of Mark chapter 16, verse 8. And the women fled from the tomb, and they didn't say anything to anyone because they were afraid. Period. They didn't tell anyone. And everybody says to me, well, they must have told somebody because, Mark wrote the gospel. Okay, yeah, fair enough. But that's confusing the story with the history. In other words, Mark is not telling a history. If he's telling a history, it doesn't make any sense. But he's telling a story. Mark has a point for the women not telling the disciples. Because in Mark's gospel, and only in Mark's gospel, the disciples can't get who Jesus is. He keeps saying to them, don't you understand? Don't you know what? Don't you get it? And they don't ever get it. And he keeps showing they don't get it. And at the end, they still don't get it. They don't even hear about it. Why would Mark do that? Well, take my class on Mark and you'll find out. In Matthew, they go and tell the disciples go to Galilee and they see Jesus there in Galilee. In Matthew, they explicitly tell. And so I sometimes somebody will say to me, well, when Mark says he didn't tell anyone anything, it means at first. Okay, I'm talking to my friend and I say, Jim seems to know the secret that I told you. I said, I told you, you're the one I told my secret. Do you know Jim? No, I didn't tell him. For a few hours. But there's another interesting issue that I think is really particularly interesting. The resurrection appearances in Matthew and Luke. As I just said, in Matthew, the disciples, they're told, they go to Galilee, they see Jesus in Galilee, and you have the final thing in Galilee, they do the thing in Galilee, and then Jesus gives them their last instructions, the Great Commission, go into all the nations, proclaim the gospel, and baptize everybody, and he gives the Great Commission, then he leaves, right? It's over. Boom. Gospel's over. All up in Galilee is where he appears to them. What about Luke? Whoa. In Luke, what happens is the women find the empty tomb. They go immediately, go tell the disciples, don't believe him. A couple of the disciples go and find out, it is empty. The next story, on the same day, we're told, it says, on the same day, two followers of Jesus are walking to the road of Emmaus, and Jesus appears to them and talks to them and reveals himself to them. And they, right away, go to tell the disciples at that hour. They go and tell, at that hour it says, they go and tell the other disciples. So this is all in the day he's raised from the dead. And while they're talking to the disciples, Jesus appears to the disciples while they're talking to them and takes them outside and gives them last instructions and ascends to heaven. Before he ascends to heaven, his instructions to them are, don't leave Jerusalem. Stay here until the until the Holy Spirit comes upon you, till God's gift comes upon you. And the same author who wrote Luke wrote the next book, the book of Acts, where they stay in Jerusalem. They're still there 50 days later till the day of Pentecost, after Jesus has ascended to heaven. And they stayed in Jerusalem the whole time. They never leave Jerusalem. In Matthew, they leave right away. Which is it? It can't be both. Well, each one's trying to emphasize something. And the key is to figure out what they're trying to emphasize. But they both can't be historically right. Does it matter? Well, yeah, it doesn't matter. Let me give one other thing which does not involve a contradiction that I've always been very struck by, which is it's not a contradiction between two accounts, it's an alternative emphasis, a different emphasis that matters, having to do with Jesus on his way to crucifixion. Mark tells an unusually powerful story, filled with pathos, emotionally gripping story. In Mark's gospel, Jesus is agonized. He's been on trial before Pontius Pilate. Pilate asks him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus says, you say so. In Greek, it's just two words, su leges, you say so. It's the only thing he says. It's not clear. Does he mean yes? Does he mean no? Maybe. You can interpret, but you say so. That's it. And he's condemned to death. He's taken off to be crucified, and he's silent the entire way to crucifixion, as if he's in shock. He's nailed to the cross. In Mark's gospel, he doesn't say a thing. He's silent. He's hanging on the cross. On the cross, he doesn't say anything. People are passing by, mocking him. The Roman soldiers have mocked him. Both of the criminals mock him. Everybody's mocking him. And at the final thing, the only thing he says the whole time on Mark's gospel, hanging on the cross, but both robbers are mocking him. The other people being crucified with him. Everybody's mocking him. At the end, he finally cries out one thing. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? And he dies. Oh, wow. You get the same account in Luke, and it's not like that. In Luke's account, Jesus is condemned to death, and while he's going on the route to crucifixion, he's not silent. He sees some women weeping for him, and he turns to them and he says, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me, for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children, for what's going to happen to you." He's more concerned about them than he is about himself. He gets to the place of crucifixion. He's not silent when they nail him to the cross. They're nailing him to the cross, and he says, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." He's hanging on the cross, and he's not silent. In Luke's gospel, both robbers don't mock him. One of them does, and the other tells the first one to be quiet. He says, "Look, we're getting what we deserve. Jesus has done nothing to deserve this." And then he turns his head to Jesus and says, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus says to him, "Truly I tell you, this day you will be with me in paradise." Jesus knows what's happening to him. He knows why it's happening to him. He's not in shock. He's not in distress. He knows what's going to happen to him after it happens to him. He's going to wake up in paradise, and this guy's going to be with him. He does not say, my God, why have you forsaken me?" in Luke. He doesn't say that in Luke. In Luke, he says, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," and dies. He's trusting God. He knows God's on his side. He's calm. He's controlled. And it's not the way he's portrayed in Mark. It's not a contradiction, but it's a difference that really matters. What ends up happening is if you take Mark's account and Luke's account and you put them together, and then you throw in Matthew's account and John's account, you get the 7 last words of the dying Jesus. Because between the 4 of them, he says 7 things. And what you have done by doing that is you've created your own gospel. And you're not paying attention to any of these 4. Because the meaning of each one now has been destroyed because you've amalgamated them. So, Jesus isn't really particularly calm, and he's not also particularly anxious or agonized. So, that's the problem with reconciling these things, and you miss the point of each one. Reading the Bible is a collection of books. How do we normally read anthologies of texts from different authors, different times, and different places? You let each author, each book, have their own say. When somebody produces a volume of scholarship on the Synoptic Gospels, and both Mark Goodacre and I have articles in there, I do not want you to say that Bart Ehrman has given up on the belief in Q. Just because somebody else says that in this volume doesn't mean I'm going to say it. You don't do that with modern anthologies or collections. No. Why do you do it with the Bible? Because it's a Bible. It's between 2 covers. But don't do that. Because when you do it, you misunderstand it. You understand each of these authors in their own historical context rather than assume that they share someone else's view, or even worse, you should not assume they share your view. That's the worst crime, when you assume that's saying what you want it to say. Don't make them say what you want to say. I'm going to run a little over time, but they can't fire me. Who really cares? I mean, who really cares about this kind of thing with the Bible? Look, I mean, does Jesus die on this day or that day? Really? That's what matters to you? Paul went to Jerusalem first and he went second. Who cares? Does this really matter? Doesn't matter. I think it really matters. It certainly matters for the 2 billion Christians in the world who see these books as their foundational documents for what to believe and how to act. 2 billion people in the world see these books as Scripture. Doesn't matter what they mean. I think, though, it's not only for those of us who are Christian, those of you who are Christian, I think it matters for everyone else. Because in our society, given this culture, given this climate, which even if a lot of people are currently leaving the faith, there are a lot of people in the faith, lots of people appeal to the Bible. Not just for their personal beliefs and practices, but for their social agendas, their political policies, and things that affect all of us, whether we're Christian or not. But what if they're misusing the Bible? What if? Several months ago, you may have heard a newspaper report about a certain congresswoman who refused to sign off on some anti-Semitic, some legislation involving anti-Semitism. Universities were going to be required not to take into account whether somebody was Jewish or not in order to decide whether to admit them. Being Jewish should have no bearing on whether you admit them or not, as directed against any kind of anti-Semitic practices by university admissions. She refused to sign, and she said the reason was because if she signed this legislation, she would no longer be allowed to affirm what the Bible says, that Herod, the Jewish king, that Herod handed Jesus over to the Jews to be crucified. I read that and thought, oh my God, what Bible is she reading? And the answer is, no Bible at all. So, biblical scholars, a number of them here with us today, can tell you quite easily about Herod in the trial narratives of Jesus in the New Testament. There are 4 gospel accounts of Jesus being put on trial. Herod does not appear in Matthew, Mark, or John, period. He does appear in the Gospel of Luke. In the Gospel of Luke, Herod is the king of Galilee, where Jesus is from, and he happens to be down in Jerusalem for Passover. Pilate is trying to get rid of Jesus because he finds him innocent, and he doesn't want to succumb to the pressure to do anything. He wants somebody else to make the decision. He hears that Herod's in town. He sends Jesus to Herod for a trial. Herod talks to him, and he finds no guilt in him. And he returns him to Pilate, the Roman governor, who condemns him to death, who does not hand him over to the Jews, hands him over to his Roman soldiers to be crucified. Where is this thing about the Jewish King Herod handing Jesus over to the Jews so the Jews can crucify him? It's in her head. It's not in the Bible. She's using the Bible to support, to oppose legislation that she doesn't like for other reasons. I don't know if it's out of ignorance. Case could be made. Or if it's malicious. I hope it's not malicious. I hope it's just ignorance. But there it is. I mean, so an argument like that simply doesn't hold for anybody who knows anything, who actually studied the book. Careless readings. I hesitate to bring this up, but I'm going to anyway. Obviously, I'm not taking support for any political position here. Seriously, I'm not. I'm not arguing for, I'm arguing about should we quote the Bible correctly. If we're going to use it, should you actually know what it says? Would that matter? In the abortion debates today, of course, most people who are opposed to abortion believe that the fetus is a living being with human rights. And again, I'm not taking a stand on that, okay? But they claim that that's what the Bible teaches. Does the Bible teach that? One verse that is frequently quoted is Jeremiah chapter 1, where the prophet says that before I was in my mother's womb, you chose me. Okay? I was chosen before I was in my mother's womb. That shows that the fetus is living. Right? No. Before I was in my mother's womb, you knew me. If you want to use this thing literally, if you want to take it literally, indicating something about the fetus having human rights, it's not talking about the fetus. It's talking about the pre-existent soul. Do these people who quote the Bible for abortion think that souls exist before conception? No. Then why are they quoting this verse? Because it's convenient, and nobody reads it carefully. They could read Exodus chapter 21, one of the 2 passages in the Bible that actually does talk about the status of the fetus. This is the next chapter after the 10 Commandments. There's a law about what to do if 2 men are in a fight They're fighting, and there's a pregnant woman standing by, and one of them accidentally hits her. We don't know if it's like with a fist or with a club or something. She gets wounded, and she miscarries because of it. The question is being dealt with is, what's the penalty? So, if the woman dies because of this blow, then it's the death penalty, we're told. Exodus 21. It's the death penalty. If the fetus dies, but the woman doesn't, the person who hit her owes her husband a fine. He's lost property. Just as if you kill his ox or his donkey, if the fetus dies, it's lost property. So there's a fine. If the woman dies, life for life. It's a death penalty. Fetus dies, pay a penalty. Property rights. It doesn't consider the fetus a human being with human rights. I do not base my political views on the Bible, myself. I think there are big problems with thinking the documents written thousands of years ago apply to our current situation, based on our scientific knowledge. So I'm not taking a stand, but I am saying if you're going to quote the Bible on this issue, you should see what it says. Because the only two passages in the Bible that talk about the status of the fetus do not treat it as a human being with human rights. I'm not saying I agree or disagree, but that's the way it is. There are no passages that talk about abortion directly, period. Jesus says nothing about it. Either do any of the other authors of the Bible. Okay, so cherry picking. Yes, right. Same-sex relations. One of the key passages in the Bible, Leviticus chapter 18. It is an abomination for a man to lay with another man. So what that means is one issue that would take a long time to explain, that I'm not going to go into because it is often misunderstood, but that doesn't matter. Let's just say it's saying that men should not have sex with men. Fine. Okay. So you should outlaw any homosexual activity. In fact, you should go after homosexuals with the law because Leviticus 18 says so. Okay, fair enough. Okay, that's your view? Then you have to follow Leviticus. How about Leviticus 19? In Leviticus 19, we're told that if anybody immigrates into your country as a foreigner, you are to treat them just like the citizens. It explicitly says that. Yeah, but that's not relevant anymore. But that gay thing, man, oh boy. I'm just telling you. 1 Timothy and 1 Corinthians. Now let's get to women for a minute. So, 1 Timothy has a notorious passage in chapter 5 that women, chapter 2, 11 through 15, that women are to be silent. They're not to exercise any authority over a man. So, used today in Christian denominations. You haven't seen a woman pope recently. And many Protestant denominations don't allow women preachers because this passage is saying that, women are not allowed to speak in church. 1 Corinthians 11 says that when women are in church, they're supposed to wear head coverings. Why do these churches that don't allow women to preach not require women to wear head coverings? Oh, because that was the custom back then. Yeah. Right, yeah, you're onto something here. You're talking about like what was like back then. So it's just completely inconsistent. So who should care? One of the reasons I valued and continue to value teaching biblical studies in the modern university is because it's a way of getting people to think about how you construct arguments and what you consider to be evidence. This is very important in all the fields of the humanities: English, history, philosophy, classics. List your field. These fields are important for giving us information and for learning substance, learning data, but they're especially important because they teach you how to think. And if you don't think, well, okay, they still let you vote. The humanities are vital to this country, and at the time when we need people to be able to see the difference between truth and falsity, when we know what is right and what is wrong, when we know whether an argument is any good, when we look to see if the evidence is actually there. Those are the things taught in the humanities, and it's precisely at the moment that we are cutting humanities in our universities. This is the worst time in the history of the planet to be cutting the humanities. These students are going to be voting. And among the humanities, religious studies, more than any other, because in the South, because of this thing, drives people to think. Because the kinds of things I've been talking to you run contrary to what they've always thought. They're going to fight against it, and they're going to find evidence for their view, or they're going to finally succumb to what I am telling you is the truth. For the broader public, we need this kind of scholarship. We need it for the Bible because the Bible is so important, but we need it because it's the kind of thing we need to be doing with our brains, using them to think. Thank you very much.